The anointing of God is so important. We want to always have the anointing when we move or when we function in the role that we are assigned to. We want to wait for the anointing because that's what gives us the power and that's what validates us. And sometimes and sometimes if there is a position or a job that you may want to do, you never want to step ahead of the anointing of God. And it's something that you will always be able to identify and you will feel it and you will know it. And once the Spirit of God is with you in the form of His anointing, you are absolutely unstoppable. And then you are equipped to actually do what God has called you to do. As always, it's such a pleasure to have you here for the Sanctuary Sunday School, powered by the Sanctuary Academy. And I want to ask you again, if you have not done so, make sure that you subscribe. And even in spite of what's going on with the pandemic, we are having a great year. We need a few more subscriptions to reach that goal for that next level. There's so many things that I want to do with you and share with you to make sure that you get everything that you need. And I just need those subscriptions. So let's go ahead and do that. Our lesson this week is Saul, Anointed King. And we've been talking about the judges, and we talked about on last week how Israel demanded a king. They rejected God's plan of leadership for them, which was the judges, and they demanded a king. And God warned them about what having a king would do, but nevertheless, God gave them what they asked for. And what I love about that, though, is that they were His people and He loved them. And even though they went against what He had as a plan for leadership for them, He still gave them what they want. And He didn't just throw anything out there and set him up to fail. In this lesson, it shows where God actually anointed and equipped Saul to be king over them. And we see Samuel. Samuel has been in our lesson for the past couple of lessons, and he was the one who God sent and God spoke to, told him who the king was going to be. And when our lesson starts, Samuel went out and he sought out to find Saul. He found Saul, he called him out, he pulled him away from his servants, and he told him this, which is a very key part of this lesson. He said he showed him the word of the Lord. That is so important because this was not Samuel's decision. This was not Samuel's word. This came at the word of the Lord. Samuel went and found who God told him to anoint as king. He didn't pick his friend. He didn't pick who he wanted to pick. He showed Saul the word of the Lord. And then it says that he anointed him with oil. And that's where we see a lot of the practices that we have even in our churches today. Typically when someone is called into the ministry or ordained by whatever the organization is, there is some sort of an anointing process, and that comes directly out of the Bible. So Samuel used the oil and he anointed Saul to be the king of Israel. And then he says that the Spirit, listen to this, the Spirit of God was going to come upon him. And look, he was going to become another man. And I am a witness that that's what God will do for you. When you submit to the call of God and when you allow the anointing of God to flow freely in your life, you will become a different person. I kid you not. For me, I think almost everything I said I would never do or that I could never do, I've done it. Because when with under the power of God's anointing, it takes you to an entirely different level. And that's what it did. Saul was transformed. And he said, the Spirit of God is going to be with you. And then he told me, he said, and at that point, when God is with you, you can do whatever you want. He said, you will be empowered to accomplish everything that you set out to do because God is with you. And that is what the anointing does. That's how you are able to do things that you never thought you'd be able to do because God is with you. And when whatever that goal is, whatever it is, God gives you the power, and when God is with you, you become absolutely unstoppable. And as we've been talking about over the past few weeks with the battle with the Philistines, and they were consistently a thorn in the flesh of the children of Israel. So part of Saul's job would be to protect the people from the Philistines, and we will see more as these stories progress about how Saul did use God. And I do want to stop and interject here because a large part of Saul's story, we all know about the negative side of it when Saul displeased God, and that he had to be replaced, and God took the lineage from Saul. But here we see that Saul was anointed, so it's not like he was never anointed, he was never called. God gave him a chance, he anointed him, and he empowered him. God was indeed with Saul when he assigned him to lead his people. And that's a very important piece of information to remember. God will never, would not ever assign you to something that he does not equip you to do. And that's important to point out, because sometimes if we fail, we try to offer excuses and say that we couldn't do it, but that's not true. If God called you and if he anointed you, he equipped you, and if you didn't do it, it's because you chose not to do it. So we want to see here, we see here that God sent Samuel to seek out Saul. We see here that Samuel anointed Saul with the oil as that he was going to be king. We see here that the Spirit of God was with Saul, and that is how he was able to achieve and accomplish the victories that he did. And so then Samuel said, I'm going to leave you for 7 days. And he told Saul the signs, the prophecies that he would see to confirm his anointing. God will confirm your anointing, where you will be 100% sure of your calling before you go out and try to function in the role that you have been anointed to. And then it says that Saul came out and he started to prophesy, right, amongst these people. And I love this because the people who knew him, they're looking at him like, who is this? When is he now a prophet? What happened? The people who knew him saw a difference in him. And that is so important. When you are called and the anointing, it changes you. And the people who thought they knew you, they don't know. And they have to relearn who you are under the power of the anointing. They saw a difference. And that's the main thing sometimes when you have leaders and you're trying to recognize if this is someone, right, that you should follow and recognize the anointing, you will see a difference. When I was coming up as a very young leader, the first thing that they taught me was that you can't be common and you can't be too familiar with the people that you're leading. Now, that's not to say that you're stuck up and I can't talk to you and I look down my nose and I'm snooty because I'm the leader and you're not. That's not it. You still possess the humility and you still have a heart and a love for people. But what it means is I can't engage in everything that you engage in, and I can't do everything and sing with you and play around with you, then turn around and try to preach to you. That's not how it works. There needs to be a difference in the leader. You're held to a higher level of accountability. And we see here that Saul did indeed rise to that level of accountability as being God's anointed king for his people. And then he went back, and it says that Saul's uncle asked him about the conversation, and won't people do that? Hey, man, what did y'all talk about? What did he want with you? And people will ask you. And so Saul told him, he said, yeah, he talked about, the asses, the animals. He said, well, the asses were missing, and so we found them. And that's all he told them. But he told him nothing about the conversation, about his anointing. And this is something that I learned a long time ago. When you're truly anointed by God, and when you're truly following God's desire for what he wants you to do, you don't have to tell anybody. They're going to see it. It's not necessary for you to walk around, yeah, I'm anointed. Yeah, God called me. When they will see the change, like when Saul started to prophesy, these people saw his anointing. It was not necessary for Saul to announce his anointing. And that is something, Saul anointed king. This is so important. And he is the first king of Israel. And this starts an entirely new era for them, and it was kicked off by Saul and his anointing. And I just want to encourage everyone here. And the anointing does not mean, is not limited to preaching and teaching. Anything that God has assigned you to do, He has anointed you to do so. And so, my challenge for you on this week is to just really allow the anointing of God to flow through you. And you can feel it. I would love it even if you send me feedback in the comments or via email or just a message or on social media or anything. Just let me know different ways that you can see God manifested in your life and the power of the anointing, because that's so important. So as we see here today, Saul, anointed king.